The worn baseball cap felt strange on his head.
Oh.
David Chen pulled it down lower over his eyes and checked his reflection in a storefront window. Perfect. Nobody would recognize him now. The faded denim jacket, old sneakers, and simple t-shirt made him look like any other guy taking a walk through the city. This was so different from his usual life. Most days, David wore expensive suits that cost more than some people made in a month. His office sat on the 47th floor of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan. People called him Sir and Mr. Chen all day long. 3 assistants managed his schedule down to the minute. His driver waited outside every building. Security guards followed him everywhere, but not today. Today, he just wanted to be normal. David walked slowly down the tree-lined path in Central Park. The autumn air felt cool against his face. Orange and red leaves crunched under his feet. For the first time in months, he could hear birds singing instead of phones ringing. He could smell hot dogs from a vendor cart instead of expensive cologne in boardrooms. A jogger ran past him, earbuds in, completely focused on her morning run. She didn't even glance his way. David smiled. When was the last time someone ignored him? Usually, people stared. They whispered to each other, pointing. Isn't that the tech guy? The billionaire? But right now he was invisible? Felt amazing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. David pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from his assistant. The board meeting was supposed to start in 2 hours. They were discussing the biggest deal in company history, a merger that would make Chen Industries even more powerful. Shareholders expected him to be there, sharp and ready to fight. Instead, Ahmed turned off his phone and shoved it back in his pocket. He thought about how this whole mess started. 3 months ago, everything seemed perfect. His company was growing fast. The newspapers wrote good things about him. His picture was on magazine covers with headlines like "The Genius of Technology" and "Young Billionaire Changes the World." Then, the problems began. A rival company accused Chen Industries of stealing their ideas. Angry customers complained about privacy issues. Government officials started asking tough questions. Every day brought new headaches, new fights, new people, demanding answers he didn't have. The worst part was the board of directors. These were supposed to be his partners, his advisors. Instead, they criticized every decision he made. They wanted him to fire loyal employees, pushed him to cut corners and save money, even if it hurt their customers. Yesterday's meeting had been brutal. One board member actually suggested that David might not be the right person to lead his own company anymore. That's when he decided to escape. David kept walking until he heard something that made him stop. Children's voices, laughing and singing. He followed the sound around a corner and found a small crowd gathered near the fountain. In the middle of the group sat an old upright piano, painted bright yellow with colorful flowers decorating its sides. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, was sitting on the bench. Her tiny fingers pressed the keys carefully, picking out a simple melody. Her grandmother stood behind her, clapping and encouraging every note. "That's beautiful, sweetie," the grandmother said. "Your mom will be so proud when she hears how much you've learned." David found himself smiling. The little girl's song wasn't perfect. She missed some notes and had to start over twice. But her face showed pure joy. She wasn't worried about impressing anyone or making money or beating competitors. She just loved making music. More people had gathered to watch. A construction worker on his lunch break stood next to a woman in a business suit. A teenager with purple hair listened next to an elderly man walking his dog. Nobody cared about anyone else's job or money or problems. They were all just enjoying a moment of simple beauty. When the little girl finished her song, everyone clapped. She beamed with pride and hugged her grandmother. Then they walked away together, the grandmother asking if she wanted ice cream before going home. The crowd began to break up too. The construction worker went back to his job site. The business woman hurried off to her next meeting. Soon, only a few people remained near the piano. David stayed where he was, staring at the empty bench. Something about that old piano called to him. The wood was scratched and weathered. Some of the white keys had turned yellow with age. A few of the black keys stuck when pressed, but it still made music, still brought people together. He remembered his own childhood piano lessons. Da-da-da, His father had insisted on them, even though money was tight. Music feeds the soul, his dad used to say, no matter what happens in life, you'll always have this. David had been good at piano. Really good. His teacher said he had natural talent. She talked about competitions and maybe even music school someday. But as he got older, other things became more important. Math class, science projects, computer, programming. His father supported those interests too, proud that his son was so smart with technology. But the piano lessons stopped. The old upright piano in their small apartment gathered dust. When David left for college, his father donated it to a local community center. Now, looking at this weathered instrument in the park, David felt something stirring inside him. A memory, maybe, or a longing for something he'd lost along the way. A park security guard walked by, nodding politely at the small remaining crowd. "Beautiful day for music," he said to nobody in particular. "That piano gets more popular every week." Amazing how something so simple can make people so happy. David checked his watch. The board meeting had probably started by now. He could imagine the angry faces around the conference table. His assistant was probably making excuses, telling them he was stuck in traffic or dealing with an emergency. Let them wait, he thought. For once in his life, David Chen was going to do something just because he wanted to, not because it would. Make money, or impress investors, or beat the competition. He was going to play piano. The last few people wandered away, leaving David alone with the instrument. He looked around nervously, then slowly walked toward the bench. His heart was beating faster now. What if someone recognized him? What if he'd forgotten how to play? What if people laughed? But as his fingers touched the old wooden bench, all those worries faded away. This wasn't about being perfect or impressive. This was about that little girl's joy, about his father's wisdom, about finding something real in a life that had become too complicated. David sat down carefully, placed his hands above the keys. Somewhere in his memory a melody was waiting. A song his father had written long ago, before dreams got buried under responsibility and success became more important than happiness. He took a deep breath and prepared to play. David's hands hovered just inches above the piano keys. This close, he could see every scratch and mark on the old instrument. Someone had carved initials into the side, JM plus RL inside a crooked heart. Coffee stains dotted the music stand. A piece of tape held one corner of the bench together. But despite all its flaws, the piano had character. It had stories to tell. A few people still lingered nearby, but they weren't really watching him. A young couple sat on a bench 20 feet away, sharing a sandwich and talking quietly. An older man fed pigeons from a paper bag, muttering to the birds like old friends. A woman in scrubs walked past quickly, probably heading to or from a hospital shift. David felt his chest tighten. What was he doing? He hadn't touched a piano in over 15 years. His fingers would be stiff and clumsy. He'd probably embarrass himself, hit wrong notes, sound like a complete beginner. Then he remembered the little girl who'd played just minutes before. She hadn't worried about being perfect. She'd just played with her heart wide open. Taking a deep breath, David finally let his fingers rest on the keys. They felt cool and smooth, worn down by thousands of other hands that had touched them before. He pressed middle C gently, just to hear the sound. The note rang out clear and true, despite the piano's age. The sound triggered something deep in his memory. Suddenly, he was 8 years old again, sitting in his family's tiny apartment. His father sat beside him on an old piano bench they'd bought at a garage sale. "Feel the music, son," his dad would say. "Don't just play the notes. Feel what they mean." His father had been a dreamer back then. By day, he worked at a furniture factory, coming home with sawdust in his hair and calloused hands. But at night, he transformed into something magical. He'd sit at their old piano and play jazz standards, blues melodies, and songs he made up. On the spot, "Someday I'll write a song that touches people's hearts," his father used to say. "Something that makes them feel less alone in the world." David pressed another key, then another. The notes hung in the autumn air like perfect little bubbles, each one carrying weight and meaning. He found himself thinking about his father's dream, about all the songs that never got heard by the world. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. Probably his assistant panicking about the missed board meeting. Or maybe reporters who'd somehow figured out he was missing. David had learned to hate that sound. The constant buzzing, beeping, ringing that followed him everywhere. But right now, sitting at this old piano in the middle of Central Park, he chose to ignore it. A jogger slowed down as she passed, her curiosity caught by the sight of someone actually sitting at the piano. She pulled out one earbud and paused, clearly hoping for some music. When David didn't immediately start playing, she looked disappointed and continued her run. That small moment made David realize something important. People wanted music. They were hungry for it. In a world full of screens and notifications and endless noise, they craved something real and beautiful. He thought about his company, Chen Industries. They made software that was supposed to connect people, but somehow it seemed to push them further apart. His apps were used by millions, but how many of those people felt truly connected? How many felt the kind of joy that little girl had shown while playing her simple song? The couple sharing lunch had finished eating and were packing up their things. The old man ran out of breadcrumbs and shuffled away, followed by his disappointed pigeon friends. Soon David would be completely alone with the piano. Maybe that was better. No pressure, no audience, no expectations. His fingers found their way to a chord F major, warm and comforting. Listening her sound with a long moment, listening as the sound slowly faded. Then another chord and another. Nothing complicated, just basic. Progressions he remembered from childhood lessons. But even those simple chords brought back a flood of memories. Summer evenings when he'd practice while his mother cooked dinner, smell of garlic and onions mixing with music in their small kitchen. His father coming home from work, tired but always making time to listen to whatever David had learned that day. "Oh, you've got something special in your hands," his father would say. "Don't ever let the world take that away from you." Somehow, without meaning to, David had let exactly that happen. Success in business had replaced music. Board meetings had replaced practice time. The language of profit margins and market share drowned out the language of melody and harmony. A new group of people appeared around the fountain, a family with 2 young children. The kids immediately noticed the piano and started pulling their parents toward it. "Can we play? Can we play?" the younger child asked, bouncing with excitement. "Let's see if this nice man is finished first," their mother said, smiling apologetically at David. David looked at the eager faces of the children and felt his heart warm. They reminded him of himself at that age, when music was pure magic and every piano was a treasure chest full of possibilities. "I'm just getting started," he told the family gently, "but you're welcome to listen if you'd like." The children clapped their hands and settled onto the grass nearby. Their parents sat on a bench, looking grateful for a few minutes of rest. Suddenly, David had an audience again. But this time, it felt different. These weren't business associates judging his performance or competitors looking for weaknesses. These were just people hoping for a moment of beauty in their day. David closed his eyes and tried to remember the song his father had written so many years ago. "Midnight Reflections," he'd called it. A jazz ballad that captured the feeling of being awake late at night, thinking about life and love and all the things that really mattered. His father had played it countless times, always changing it slightly, adding new touches here and there. "Good song grows," he'd explain. "It lives and breathes and becomes something new each time you play it." David had learned the song by listening, never from sheet music. His father believed that the best music came from the heart, not from notes on a page. "Feel it first," he'd say then. "Let your fingers follow your feelings." 30 years later, David could still feel that melody somewhere deep inside him. It was like finding an old photograph in a forgotten box, faded but still precious, still full of meaning. He placed his hands in position and took one more deep breath. The children on the grass grew quiet, sensing that something special was about to happen. Even the pigeons seemed to pause in their endless search for crumbs. David was ready to bring his father's song back to life. The first note came out softer than David expected. His finger touched the key so gently that the sound almost disappeared into the park's natural noise. But it was there a single pure tone that seemed to float in the cool autumn air. He paused. For a moment, surprised by how familiar it felt, His hands remembered things his mind had forgotten. The weight of the keys, the way his wrists should curve, even the slight resistance of this old piano's action. It was like riding a bicycle. After years of walking, the second note followed, then a third. Simple at first, just testing the waters, the melody his father had written started to emerge, note by note. It's like a photograph slowly developing in a dark room. The two children sitting on the grass stopped fidgeting. Their parents looked up from their phones. Even the pigeons seemed to pause their endless hunt for crumbs. David felt his shoulders relax as the music began to flow. This was Midnight Reflections, the song his father had hummed while washing dishes, played softly during late-night conversations, and performed. With such love during those precious family moments, the melody started simple, but grew more complex as David's confidence returned. His left hand found the bass notes, providing a gentle foundation for the flowing right-hand melody. The piano responded beautifully, despite its age and wear. Every note rang true and clear. A businessman walking past stopped mid-stride when he heard the music. He was probably late for a meeting, phone already in his hand to make another call. But something about the melody made him pause. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and moved closer to listen. The song was haunting, but hopeful at the same time. It spoke of quiet moments when the world slows down and people remember what truly matters. David could almost see his father's hands moving across their old piano keys, creating magic from memory and feeling. A woman pushing a stroller stopped nearby, gently rocking her sleeping baby while listening. The music seemed to calm the child even deeper into peaceful sleep. She smiled at David, mouthing beautiful without making a sound. More people began to gather. A delivery driver parked his bike and walked over. A group of college students put down their books and backpacks. An elderly woman with a walking cane moved slowly but deliberately toward the piano, as if drawn by an invisible force. David barely noticed the growing crowd. He was lost in the music, lost in memories of his father's gentle guidance and endless patience. "Don't think so much," his dad used to say during lessons. "Music isn't a math problem to solve. It's a story to tell." What story was this song telling? David found himself understanding it in a way he never had as a child. It was about longing, the human desire for connection, for meaning, for something beautiful in an often difficult world. It was about hope persisting even in dark moments, stars visible only at midnight. His fingers moved more confidently now, adding small flourishes and variations that felt natural and right. The song was alive, breathing, changing with each moment, just as his father had taught him. It's fun. The music was growing. A street artist who'd been sketching portraits nearby abandoned his easel and came closer. His pencils and charcoal were forgotten as he focused completely on the unexpected concert happening before him. Art calling to art, one creative spirit recognizing another. The businessman who'd stopped first pulled out his phone, but not to make a call. He started recording, holding the device carefully to capture both the music and the moment. Others did the same, but quietly, respectfully. Nobody wanted to disturb the magic unfolding. An elderly man in a wheelchair arrived with his caregiver, who positioned him where he could see and hear clearly. The old man's eyes closed as he listened, and tears began rolling down his cheeks. The caregiver looked concerned, but the man whispered, "These are happy tears, dear. This song, it reminds me of my late wife." David reached the song's most complex section, where his father had always added those special jazz harmonies that made the melody shimmer. His hands stretched across the keys, finding chord progressions he hadn't played in decades. Muscle memory guided him through passages that should have been impossible after so many years away from music. The crowd had grown to about 30 people now, forming a natural semicircle around the piano. They stood quietly, respectfully, united by the shared experience of unexpected beauty. Strangers became temporary companions, all touched by the same emotional journey. A young woman with a violin case strapped to her back pushed through the crowd. She was probably a music student from one of the nearby schools. Her trained ear recognized the sophistication of what she was hearing. This wasn't some amateur plinking around on a public piano. This was real musicianship, real artistry. She pulled out her phone and began live streaming the performance, whispering to her followers, "You guys have to hear this. I don't know who this pianist is, but he's incredible. This song is absolutely beautiful, and I've never heard it before." David's playing grew even more expressive as he approached the song's emotional climax. This was the part where his father always said the music reached for something higher. The melody soared above the accompaniment, notes stretching and bending like a voice crying out across a vast landscape. The businessman found himself thinking about his own father, who died 5 years ago without ever hearing his son say how much he loved him. The woman with the stroller remembered her grandmother's lullabies. The college students forgot about their upcoming exams and student loans, lost in pure beauty. Even the delivery driver, who usually rushed through his routes thinking only about the next stop, felt something shift inside him. He thought about his own dreams of becoming a photographer, dreams he'd set aside for the security of steady work. David's fingers danced across the keys with increasing passion. He was no longer the careful, controlled businessman who lived his life in conference rooms and quarterly reports. He was his father's son, channeling decades of suppressed creativity into this moment of pure expression. The song began its gentle descent toward the conclusion. But David wasn't ready to let it end. He found himself extending the melody, exploring variations his father might have loved. The music spoke of reconciliation with the past, with lost dreams, with the person he used to be before success complicated everything. As the crowd listened in respectful silence, something magical was happening. Barriers were dissolving. Businessman stood next to the delivery driver. The college student sat beside the elderly woman. The street artist nodded in appreciation at the violin student. Music was doing what it does best, bringing people together across all the things that usually divide them. David could feel the song building toward its inevitable conclusion. But he also sensed that something much bigger was just beginning. David's eyes were closed now, completely lost in the music. His fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own, guided by 30 years of buried memories and emotions. The song flowed through him, not from him. He wasn't playing the piano anymore. He was just letting his father's melody find its way back into the world. The crowd had grown to almost 50 people. Office workers on their lunch breaks stood next to tourists with cameras. Parents held sleeping babies while their older children sat cross-legged on the ground, mesmerized. Even the park's maintenance crew had stopped their work to listen. In the back of the crowd, an elderly man named Harold felt his heart racing. He gripped his walking cane tighter and moved closer, pushing gently through the respectful audience. Something about this melody was familiar, hauntingly, impossibly familiar. Harold had been a jazz lover for over 60 years. He'd spent countless nights in smoky clubs, listening to legends play in basement venues that no longer existed. His memory was a library of forgotten songs, lost recordings, and musicians who never got their chance at fame. And this song, this beautiful, aching melody, ... He'd heard it before, but where? When it felt like trying to remember a dream after waking up, the violin student was still live streaming, her phone capturing every note for her growing online audience.
Her viewers
Were typing excited comments. "Who is this guy? What song is this?" Is incredible. The video was being shared and reshared, spreading across social media faster than she could read the responses. David reached the song's most powerful moment, where the melody climbed higher and higher, like a bird soaring above the city. His left hand provided a steady heartbeat rhythm while his right hand told the story his father had written decades ago. Each note carried the weight of dreams deferred, love remembered, and hope that refuses to die. A woman in the crowd started crying. She didn't know why exactly. The music just touched something deep inside her that she'd forgotten was there. She thought about her own father, who'd passed away last spring without ever hearing her tell him how much his bedtime stories had meant to her. The businessman who'd been recording felt his phone battery dying, but he didn't care. This wasn't about capturing the moment for later. It was about being completely present right now. He slipped the phone into his pocket and just listened with his whole heart. Harold's memory finally clicked into place, like a puzzle piece finding its home. Midnight Reflections. He whispered the title to himself, barely breathing. It was impossible, but he was sure. This was the song Edwin Chen had played at the Blue Note Jazz Club in 1967. Harold had been 23 then, a young jazz enthusiast who spent every penny he earned on concert tickets. Edwin Chen was an unknown pianist who played one set that magical Thursday night in February. He'd performed original compositions, including this achingly beautiful ballad that seemed to stop time itself. But Edwin had disappeared from the jazz scene after that one performance. Harold had searched for recordings, asked other musicians, even tried to contact clubs where Edwin might have played. Nothing. It was like the man and his music had simply vanished. Now, 58 years later, here was that same melody being played by a stranger in Central Park. David's performance was building toward its climax. His whole body swayed with the music now, completely surrendered to the emotional journey his father had created. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. His breathing was deep and steady, like a runner finding his rhythm. Delivery driver found himself thinking about his own grandfather, who'd played harmonica on the front porch every evening. He'd never understood why the old man spent so much time with that simple instrument. But listening to this piano performance, he finally got it. Music wasn't about complexity or showing off. It was about touching the place in people's hearts. Where words couldn't reach, a young mother bounced her fussy toddler who'd been cranky all morning. But as the melody washed over them, the child grew calm and still. The music seemed to speak a language that even a 2-year-old could understand. A language of comfort, safety, and unconditional love. The college students had put away their phones and notebooks completely. One of them, a business major who'd been stressed about upcoming exams and job interviews, felt something shift inside her chest. She'd been so focused on building the right career that she'd forgotten about the painting classes she used to love. This music reminded her that there were more important things than just making money. Harold worked his way closer to the piano, his cane tapping against the asphalt. He had to know for sure. As he got nearer, he could see the pianist's profile, the shape of his nose, the way he held his shoulders, even his hand position on the keys. The resemblance was unmistakable. David felt the song reaching its natural conclusion, but he wasn't ready to let it end. This might be his only chance to honor his father's memory, to share this gift with the world the way it was meant to be shared. He extended the melody, adding variations and embellishments that felt like conversations with his dad's spirit. The street artist watched. David's hands with professional appreciation, someone who created beauty for a living, he recognized. True artistry when he saw it. This wasn't just technical skill. This was someone pouring his soul onto the keys. Holding nothing back, the final notes began to cascade like autumn leaves falling from trees. David's playing grew softer, but more intense, each note carefully chosen and perfectly placed. The melody wound down slowly, reluctantly, like someone saying goodbye to a beloved friend. When the last note finally faded into silence, the entire crowd stood frozen for a moment. Nobody wanted to be the first to break the spell. The silence stretched on, heavy with emotion and shared wonder. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then another, then everyone at once. But it wasn't just polite appreciation. It was gratitude. These strangers had been given something precious, something they hadn't even known they needed. David opened his eyes, startled to find himself surrounded by so many faces. For a moment, he forgot where he was, forgot about his disguise, forgot about everything except the warmth in people's expressions. "What was that song?" called out the woman with the stroller. It was absolutely beautiful. David's throat felt tight. It was ... double quotes. He started, then stopped. How could he explain? That's when Harold stepped forward, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "That was Midnight Reflections," he said in a voice that shook with emotion. "And young man, you play it exactly like your father did." David's hands froze above the piano keys. The old man's words hit him like a lightning bolt. Your father. How could this stranger possibly know about his dad? Harold stepped closer, his walking cane trembling in his grip. The crowd sensed something important was happening and grew even quieter. Even the city noise seemed to fade away. No honking cars, no distant sirens. Just the sound of two men about to share something profound. "You knew my father?" David asked, his voice barely above. A whisper. Harold nodded, wiping tears from his eyes with a shaky hand. "Edwin Chen. I saw him play that exact song at the Blue Note Jazz Club in February 1967. I was just a young man then, barely out of college, but I never forgot that performance. Never forgot that song." David felt the world spinning around him. His father had never talked much about his musical past, always saying those days were behind him. David had assumed his dad had only played at small local venues, maybe a few church events. But the Blue Note, that was legendary. Real musicians played there. "I don't understand," David said, standing up from the piano bench. "My father was just ... He worked at a furniture factory, gave piano lessons in our apartment. He never mentioned playing at famous clubs." Harold smiled through his tears. "Your father was modest, too modest." That night at the Blue Note, he opened for a well-known trio visiting from Chicago. The audience came to hear the headliners, but they left talking about Edwin Chen. "I've never heard anything like Midnight Reflections before or since." The businessman in the crowd had started recording again when he sensed the conversation was important. The violin student was still live streaming, her viewers now numbering in the thousands as the video spread across social media. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. "What happened to him?" Harold continued. "After that one performance, he just disappeared from the jazz scene. I asked around for years, trying to find recordings of his music or news of other performances. Nothing. It was like he'd never existed." David's mind raced back to family stories he'd half forgotten. His parents had met in 1968, just a year after Harold's memory. His mother had been a nurse at the local hospital. His father had been ... what? David realized he'd never really known. What his dad did before the furniture factory job? "He met my mother," David said slowly, pieces clicking together. "She was pregnant with my older sister by 1969. Maybe he gave up music to focus on family." Harold's eyes widened with understanding. That would explain it. Back then, musicians didn't make steady money unless they were already famous. Man, with a family to support, would need something more reliable. The college students in the crowd exchanged glances. They were all facing similar choices, following their passions versus choosing practical careers. This conversation was hitting them right in the heart. The woman with the stroller stepped closer. "But the song lived on," she said softly. "Through you." That's beautiful. David felt overwhelmed. All these years, he'd thought his father's music had died with him. But here was proof that Edwin Chen had touched people's lives, that his art had mattered to someone other than his family. "He used to say that song would outlive him," David said, more to himself than to the crowd. "I thought he was just being dramatic. Dad always had big dreams." Harold laughed, a sound full of joy and sadness mixed together. He was right. That song has been living in my memory for nearly 60 years. And now, hearing you play it, it's like your father is here with us. The delivery driver found himself thinking about his own dreams again. Maybe it wasn't too late to pick up that camera, to try photography on weekends. If this man could honor his father's memory through music after 30 years, maybe there was still time for anyone to change their path. David looked around at all the faces surrounding him. Young and old, rich and poor, all different backgrounds and stories, but right now they were connected by something his father had created decades ago. The song had built a bridge between strangers, just like his dad had always believed music could do. "There's something else," Harold said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an old, worn program from the Blue Note. "I kept this all these years. Call it sentiment, call it hope. But I always believed I'd hear that song again someday." He handed the program to David with shaking hands. There, in faded print, was his father's name, Edwin Chen, pianist. Below it was a list of songs, including Midnight Reflections, original composition. David stared at the program, his vision blurring with tears. Physical proof that his father had been more than just a factory worker with a hobby. He'd been an artist, a creator, Someone whose music had moved people enough that a stranger had kept a program for 6 decades. The violin student's live stream had now reached tens of thousands of viewers. Comments were flying by. "This is so beautiful. I'm crying at work." Music really does connect us all. The video was being shared across platforms, spreading far beyond anyone in the park could imagine. But David didn't know about any of that. Right now, his world had shrunk to this moment, this connection with his father's legacy. "He talked about you," Harold said gently. "That night at the club, after his set, he said he had a young son who loved music, who had magic in his fingers. He was so proud, so hopeful about your future." David's chest felt tight. His father had died believing his son would become a musician. Instead, David had chosen technology, business, money. Had his dad been disappointed? Had he felt like his musical legacy was ending? "I let him down," David said quietly. Harold said firmly, placing a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "You brought his song back to life today, gave it to all these people. That's exactly what he would have wanted." The crowd began to applaud again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for the performance, it was celebration of a connection across time, of dreams that refuse to die, of love that continues even after death. David looked around at all these strangers who had become for a few minutes. A community united by music. The businessman had tears in his eyes. The college students were hugging each other. The woman with the baby was smiling through her own tears. This was what his father had always talked about. This feeling of bringing people together, of touching hearts, of making the world a little less lonely. David's phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he didn't reach for it. The board meeting, the company crisis, the pressure from shareholders, all of that seemed small and distant now. He'd found something much more valuable than any business deal. He'd found his way back to his father's dreams, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to make those dreams his own.